UrbanTalk would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and the traditional owners of the land on which we record this podcast, the Gadigal of the Eora Nation. We recognise their continued connection to country and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Welcome to the UrbanTalk podcast, the show where we bring together communities, planners, developers and fresh ideas to shape the cities we all call home. UrbanTalk is all about bridging the gap between the industry professionals building our neighbourhoods and the communities living in them. We're here to make conversations about urban development transparent, accessible and we hope exciting. In each episode, we'll unpack the issues, challenges and visions that shape our cities. I'm your host, Belinda Barnett. Last year, we were fortunate to have the New South Wales Minister for Planning and Public Spaces, the Honourable Paul Scully, as our guest. On that podcast, we discussed the initiatives being undertaken by the government to address the housing crisis. These included planning reform, reducing red tape, the work of the Housing Delivery Authority, and the introduction of new planning controls such as transit-orientated development precincts, the low and medium-rise pattern books, and development incentives to boost affordable housing supply. If you missed that episode, I'd encourage you to go back and listen to episode 18 of the UrbanTalk podcast. But let's face it, those initiatives only address one side of the reform required if we are to deliver our state's National Housing Accord target of 377,000 new homes by June 2029. We also have to boost consumer confidence in the construction quality of new housing product, achieve a fair and equitable balance between the rights of renters and the rights of landlords, and get the owners of apartments to adopt a sound asset management approach to strata management and maintenance. The New South Wales Government has been actively working across each of these areas, formulating new policy initiatives. And to discuss this policy reform, today I am delighted to be joined by the Minister for Building and the Minister for Better Regulation and Fair Trading, the Honourable Anoulack Chanthivong, who's also the member for Macquarie Fields. Welcome, Minister, to the podcast.
Well, thank you very much, Belinda, for having me. Looking forward to having a great conversation about such an important topic for the people of New South Wales.
It is a really important topic. And you're an incredibly busy man because in addition to the carriage of the portfolios I've already mentioned, you are also custodian of the Minister for Industry. You're also the Minister for Industry and Trade, the Minister for Innovation, Science and Technology, and the Minister for Corrections. It's tiring just saying all of those roles that you have to take on a day-by-day basis. So well done. But today in the podcast, we're really just going to focus on two of your portfolios that intersect with building and consumer protection. And so to begin with, I thought it might be helpful for you to highlight the distinction between your portfolios that impact housing and construction and those of the Minister for Planning and Public Spaces. So can you describe for our listeners the difference and where your responsibilities lie?
Yeah, look, when you think of housing, it's a spectrum. So my good friend, the Minister for Planning, Paul Scully, in his powers as the planning minister, determines where to build, what can be built, and structurally what type of buildings can be done. In my space as the Minister for Building, I look at making sure that residential homes, whether they are one level, two-storey or high-rise towers, are built to a high-quality standard. So I'm looking at how they're built. And then in my Better Regulation and Fair Trading hat, I look at the way actually people live in their homes. So, I said the spectrum is what you can build, how you get it approved, how you build it, making sure it's high quality, and of course, how you live in your homes, really giving people a sense of certainty and trust and confidence. So it's a interdependent chain between Paul and I.
That's a really good way of breaking it down. So thank you. When we were preparing for the podcast and we were talking about your responsibilities, I could hear how passionate you are about wanting to achieve meaningful reform, both in terms of housing quality and also in strata management. Is there a problem across these portfolios that you are more personally motivated by? Is there something that you've experienced personally that really is driving you?
Yeah. Well, look, fundamentally, buying a home or getting to a property is one of the big decisions that Australians make in their lifetime. Financially, emotionally, personally, it almost signifies a change in your life progression. So, providing that level of confidence for people to, invest all their hard-earned money to buying a home, making sure that that quality of building that they're purchasing is sound, is really a personal motivation. And I think of the next generation where, buying a home is going to be such a challenge. And so we have to really think about what's driving us and what's driving me to make sure that our regulatory front, that the government is doing all that it can to provide confidence and trust in the market so that Australians, young and old, when they're moving into a home, buying a home, can have that great level of confidence. And of course, now with housing affordability being such a challenge, renting is becoming more and more prominent. It is a different type of living. It's neither inferior or superior. Some people rent for a range of reasons. Maybe they're transitory. They, got jobs that take them here, there, and everywhere, or that's just their choice. So we've got to make sure that renting is also works for the renter and the rental property market in general.
Let's start by talking about your portfolio as Minister for Building. The Building Commission falls under your portfolio, and the role of the New South Wales Building Commissioner first started in 2019 with the appointment of David Chandler, OAM. And it was created to restore trust, improve the quality of residential construction, and to address major defects following high-profile building failures, including Mascot Towers and Opal Towers. In October 2024, James Sherrard was appointed to that role, and Mr Sherrard is on record saying that he is focused on raising the standards of residential construction to ensure homeowners get the quality they deserve, and that the Commission will not hesitate to take strong action against builders who cut corners. How effective, Minister, has the Building Commission been in turning the tide on developer accountability?
Yeah, look, this is a very big ship, and I think David Chandler was the right person for the right time, given the significant episodes we had of building structural failures, Mascot Towers in particular, and also Opal Towers and other buildings that we had. So you've got to think of the residential building construction market, not just as supply and demand, but actually trust and confidence. Because if people are not going to fork out, millions of dollars for an apartment and for a home, which they're not sure whether the quality is actually there. So, and if people don't have confidence, then people aren't going to buy, and developers are not going to build. So there's a significant cycle that we've got, and that's why establishing the Building Commission New South Wales as a standalone regulator has been a really good move by the government to ensure that it is focused on maintaining this quality. We've obviously resourced it quite well, over $130 million over the forwards, and James has obviously just started, but also looking at ways we can give the Building Commission greater powers. Some of the things we have done, for example, is to strong laws against anti-phoenixing, which is a perennial problem in the building industry. So if you're caught, you're involved in building collapses or building phoenixing, then the Commission can, review or suspend your license for up to 10 years. We've increased the powers of inspection. That is, the Building Commission now can go into Class 1, which is essentially your standalone home, 1 up to 3 stories. We can go that. We do anytime, anywhere blitzes across. So we've got policy frameworks to work with industry, because regulation is important, but also setting the normative standards for industry to lift their performance is also. So there's a partnership here involved with industry as well. And I think we're making good inroads, but it is a big ship. But it does take time, but we are really working moving forward with that.
Can you walk us through some of the recent building productivity reforms that you've introduced to restore trust and accountability?
Yeah, look, fundamentally, you can't build anything if you can't get it approved. So we actually have to really make that process seamless and efficient. Currently, you actually need 2 sets of plans for the same building, because there are 2 sets of legislation, that is the building legislation and the planning legislation. It doesn't make sense for a builder, for a developer to submit 2 sets of plans. It's the same building. So what we want to do in the building productivity productivity reforms is focused on 3 core pillars. 1, seamless approvals and processing. 2, ensuring that we have greater integrity, in particular with private certifiers. And 3, actually adoption of modern methods of manufacturing. So with the approval process, really, I said, only 1 set of plans. And if you're making minor variations to the original DA, then you don't have to go back to the council and submit another DA. And that obviously takes a lot of time and consumes a lot of resources. And also having stage approvals, because an approval for a big building, complex building, can go on for months. What we want to do, what the government wants to do with its building productivity reforms, is say, look, we'll approve this stage so you can actually get onto building. You approve this next stage, you get onto the next build, rather than wait till the end before you start construction. So that's actually really important. Now, part of the integrity process around certifiers, there's been a number of issues around the role of certifiers. So most do the right thing. We're going to make sure that we maintain that integrity, because that's how you drive trust and confidence in the sector. We're increasing the penalties, but also increasing the uptraining of the standards as well. And lastly, we cannot build the homes we need based on old world practices of, bricks and mortar out there doing concrete. We need to think about technology and innovation, how we do off-site manufacturing, how we do great buildings off-site and then bring it on. I've seen the technology. It is wonderful and we need to adopt it, but we need to maintain there's a quality of standard in that and encourage consumers to take it up.
Absolutely. I know when we had the planning minister on, he's very passionate about prefabricated construction techniques. And we'll talk a little bit further about those. I want to, deep dive into the 10-year home warranty insurance scheme that you're introducing, because I think that's a really great thing, great initiative. How will this protect purchasers of new housing, and who will pay for the insurance, and what type of new housing constructs will it apply to?
Yep. So it's called the 10-year building warranties is called a decennial liability insurance. That's its DLI. So the way it works is this. We've got legislation before the Parliament, which I think will really encourage the uptake of DLI. Essentially, a builder or a developer takes out an insurance on a strata building, that is a building greater than a class 2, greater than three stories. And that building insurance protects the owners and the residents for up to 10 years on any structural defects, common property, so that if there is a defect, then the insurance company pays to get that fixed, not the owners. So a building insurance will take out a premium. The insurance company, of course, will get a revenue from that premium that protects the owners and protects the building structural integrity too, because you think about if an insurer is going to insure a product, well, they'd want to make sure that that building is built to scratch, because they don't want to claim on that building either. So you have a dual level of oversight from the government through the Building Commission, make sure that things are done properly. And also the insurance company has an incentive to also look at making sure that whoever's doing the works in the building has done it, because they don't want to pay out a claim either. So in that sense, you have this double level supervision to ensure quality for the owners and for the market. It means, well, that's pretty good. So in that sense, it provides a premium quality of trust and confidence, and we're really encouraged by the feedback that we had. And our legislation, which is currently before the Parliament, is all about encouraging the take-up of this very important product.
So will it be voluntary to a developer to take it up?
Yeah. Look, so the government has intention that once the market matures, there is enough competition and there's enough spreading of proportional spreading of a number of insurance companies in the market, then we want to make it mandatory by towards the end of this decade. And that's really important because it will replace the current Strata bond scheme, which developers have to take out anyway. It's also cheaper. So reducing the cost for developers, providing confidence for owners, I think it's a real win for both, for the market in general, which we hope more developers will take up.
Fantastic. No, it sounds a great initiative, and it would be good to see it become mandatory.
Yeah.
I understand that the government's just settled on Mascot Tower's dispute. Can you share with listeners, how this played out for the owners of the apartments in that development? And what was the key reform lesson that the government learnt from this shocking ordeal?
Yeah, look, the journey of those residents at Mascot Towers was really troubling and very concerning, because they were held in limbo by the former government for 5 years. No solution, no outcome, no thinking. Now, the episode of Mascot Towers has actually informed all the regulation or reform the government's doing. We managed to resolve that, of course, making sure that residents were obviously looked after. It was a special case of obviously a building defect, and that's why we're toughening up the issues around private certifiers, bringing in DLI insurance, so that way if there are future defects, residents are not up for it, it's actually the builder, and making the builder more responsible. We've obviously increased the teeth for the building commission. I said more inspections, obviously looking at anti-phoenixing, because the builders at Mascot Towers has obviously done a runner, and what we want to do is actually avoid all those things. So that experience has informed the importance of the regulatory framework, and also identifying where the greatest risks are, so that the Commission and the government can work with the industry to continue to improve the standards of building construction and bring in trust and confidence to the market.
Well, it was a shocking ordeal for me to go through, but it's good to see that, I guess, it has been driving the reform that you're talking about. When I think of building reform, I immediately think that it's a big city issue. But I know that you are also directing a lot of initiatives at regional centres. Can you share with us what those initiatives are and why? Well, what are the types of issues that regional centres are experiencing?
Yeah, look, just because you live in regional New South Wales, you deserve the same level of quality of construction in your home or in your apartment. So that's a very important principle that the government wants to ensure that is articulated across New South Wales. You're not going to get a lesser standard. You're not going to get a lesser standard of quality just because you live in regional New South Wales. Two, we're seeing more and more people move to regional, in particular along the coast, and why wouldn't you? In particular, a lot of sea changes, older Australians who've obviously, the kids have left the home's too big, why wouldn't you retire in a beautiful place on the north coast or on the south coast, or in parts of country New South Wales, in this way, life is a little bit more slower, the views are great, the food is great, the community bonding is there. So in that sense, what we want to do is send a very clear message to the building construction industry that the quality it must be maintained wherever you build. So we've done things, of course, like what we call our anytime, anywhere inspections. We've done 850 site inspections across regional New South Wales, all across New South Wales, in the country, on the coast, making sure that consumers and home buyers can be confident, and we want to maintain that level of confidence in the market.
That's great. In 2022, Construct New South Wales commissioned a report from the research company McCrindle, and it highlighted, the lack of confidence that we've obviously been talking about, particularly amongst purchasers of new apartments. Clearly, the major proportion of new stock that's going to be built under a lot of the new planning controls is targeting multi-unit housing. One of the early measures that was implemented, I guess, by the Building Commission to address consumer confidence was to provide a registration system for developers and builders, being the iCert system. Minister, can you explain to our listeners what iCert is, what the uptake has been, and how many developers and builders in New South Wales are now registered under iCert?
Well, look, iCert stands for the Independent Construction Industry Rating Tool. So essentially, it's a risk tool of a builder. There's a private company called Equifax that obviously looks at a builder, looks at their history, looks at their financial ability, looks at their construction quality, who they're actually partnering with. And what it does, it actually gives a star rating to a builder. That is, if you've got a 5 gold star, then you're actually in pretty good nick. You've also got a great record, but it's also at a point in time of a builder too. So what that does is about informing the consumer to think about, what's this builder like? What are their building histories been? What are their financial situations? Who do they actually partner with to build? So that's give an indication on the quality of the builder. So it's voluntary. What we want to encourage is that we want the consumers to actually drive this. So if you're buying a unit, an apartment, if I was a consumer, I'd be encouraging to say, look, do you actually have an iCert rating, X builder or Y builder? Because that gives me a little bit of extra confidence that the builder or the developer has actually gone through another level of assessment to determine their financial viability, so they don't do the runner in anti-phoenixing. Also, what their history has been like, had they built quality buildings before. So look, we want to encourage as many builders as we can to take out an iCert rating, but we also want to encourage consumers to ask their builder, do they have an iCert rating, or have they actually taken out DLI insurance as well? So this is actually really, really important.
Again, is there a move to make it mandatory?
No, iCert, we don't want to make iCert mandatory because A, it's not a government product.
Right.
It's a
Okay.
private product, but I think the best way to increase uptake is to have it consumer driven.
Right.
Like I said,
Okay.
I encourage those who are buying their next apartment to ask the question. And I think
Yeah.
the more consumers want it, the more the market will provide it. And I think that's the best way to drive the uptake of iCert.
Is the how is the construction sector, I guess, reacting to the building reforms you're putting out there? Do they see them as, more red tape? Okay, it's going to just drive our costs up, or are they getting behind them and they think they're, supportive of them?
Yeah, look, I think one, it's in both of the government's interest and the industry interest to work together. This is a partnership, this is a collaboration. It wouldn't surprise anybody that when you try to do significant change, there's always going to be a level of resistance. But often I find that there's so much that we agree on and there's very little that we actually disagree on. So I suppose my message to the industry has been that let's work on the things we really agree on. Let's provide the market certainty and clarity in what those regulatory changes are going to be, because we actually have the same objective: high quality and quantity homes for the people of New South Wales. The government and myself as minister, I'm not interested in putting in more red tape for the industry. I'm interested in making sure that the industry thrives, that there's quality construction happening for the consumer, and those two things are not mutually exclusive. So, look, it's been very constructive. Sure, we've had points of differences, which I think is not a bad thing in itself, but often sometimes it's a case of more communication and more listening and more understanding. And I pretty much have appreciated the industry's collaboration and partnership, and also a level of acceptance that we can't get everything, and but we've got, I think, a bulk of what we both want, and both what the consumer wants as well. So we can't, weaken consumer confidence because it as a result of no red tape or no regulatory reform. We need to balance both, because you don't have a market if you don't have consumers, and consumers want trust and confidence, and we can balance and we can achieve that, and I think we actually have.
Do you think the sector understands or appreciates the drop in consumer confidence that has occurred in new housing product?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they do, because it's in the industry's interest. Because as I mentioned, markets work on trust and confidence. I'm not going to invest all my hard-earned money and take out a million or multi-million-dollar mortgage if I think that house or that apartment is not done of a high sense. So industry has a vested interest, as does government, because we want more high quality buildings in the sector. So in that sense, we're on the same boat here, and our journeys are together.
Let's talk a little bit more about the prefabrication initiatives. As I said, Minister Scully was very excited and passionate when he was talking about them. There were a number of prefabricated homes, I think, had just been completed down in his electorate of Wollongong. And he could certainly see, I guess, how increasing prefabricated housing is certainly going to boost supply and also reduce costs. So in your capacity and under your portfolio, Minister, can you elaborate on how the government is supporting modular and prefabricated construction?
Yeah. Look, one, as I mentioned earlier, we cannot build the homes that the people of New South Wales need if we don't adopt new methods of construction and technology innovation. Fundamentally, for the builders, it's 20% cheaper, and for the industry and for the consumers, it's 50% faster. So how can we not look at this option into providing the homes? Now, from my perspective as a Minister for Building and the Minister for Better Regulation and Fair Trading, what we need to do is, one, encourage and instill confidence that modern methods of manufacturing or prefab homes They're not an inferior product, they are a different product. So I think creating consumer acceptance, consumer awareness of the quality of these buildings is the first point. The second point is that we need to have standardisation in the quality of these buildings to make sure that these constructions are built to a high standard, because the last thing that we need is, for example, a prefab mascot towers, because that will drive consumers away different. So having good regulatory frameworks to ensure there is quality construction off-site and obviously installed on-site is really important. And that's why the New South Wales government, through myself as building minister, is really taking a strong lead nationally to encourage uptake of this new method, new design. But we need also national laws as well, because we can't have the case where a quality construction on the Gold Coast or Coolangatta can't be used in the Tweed. It's separated by a street, or vice versa. That is, we've got a great manufacturer in Albury that can't actually build a house, not in Victoria. And so we need nationally consistent construction. We need obviously chains of responsibility, and that's what we're working towards in terms of the building regulatory framework. And thirdly, the New South Wales government is actually leading by example in adopting modern methods of manufacturing in our social and affordable and public housing. The government's willing to stamp its imprimatur on it, and what we want to do is encourage the market to take it up as well. So lots happening in this space, still a bit more work to do, but instilling confidence, it is a quality product, and making sure that we actually instill this level of confidence is really important to accelerate the take-up of this type of homes.
It's a good point you make about, I guess, national consistency in product, particularly if it's also going to boost our manufacturing sector in housing. And it's interesting. I didn't realise that I guess a lot of this was being driven at a federal government level. So that's wonderful. Let's talk a little bit about rental housing and affordability. The housing supply challenge, as we know, is also linked to the rental crisis. But you've had some really big wins in this area. New South Wales has made some of the biggest rental changes in years, ending no ground evictions, banning rent bidding, and limiting rental increases to once a year. What are the policy wins, Minister, you're most proud of in this area?
Well, I said, let's go back to some really fundamentals too. 1 in 3 people in New South Wales are renting, and they're going to be renting for longer. And not only that, renting now is not a rite of a life passage for younger Australians, where I'll get a couple of friends from university and let's have a shared 3-bedding in the city or a 3-bedroom house, and we'll go out partying. It's actually now transcending across older Australians, Australians with families. So people are renting, and the household types are also different now as well. So that's why the government has been really focused in making significant rental law changes. It hasn't been easy. It's been a difficult journey, and it's a very hard reform to do, because if it was easy, it would have been done in the last 12 to 14 years, but it actually wasn't. But we were determined, given the number of people in New South Wales who are going to be renting for longer, that this was important reform to do. Banning no grounds evictions means that people can have greater certainty in their rental property. They can, embed roots in their local community. You can't kick out somebody out of their home. Yes, it's a rental property. It's also their home as well, where they live with their kids, where they live in their local community without a proper reason. So there's got to be a balance, and that's what we've actually managed to. And that has been a huge reform, providing certainty for renters, but also for landlords as well. And renting, of course, is not cheap. It's quite expensive. But getting supply in the market is fundamental, but also making sure that where we can, we help renters with simple costs, like making sure you can only increase your rent once a year. And if that rent's tight, there's dispute, you can also take it to NCAT. Making sure renters don't have to pay for their background checks. $50 to $60. It's a lot for some renters. You don't have to pay for your own background checks, of course. Making sure there are fee-free ways to pay your rent. That is, credit card surcharges are the bugbear of so many consumers, and we obviously want to take that away. We've also, of course, and in the latter and the final stages of our portable, our smart rental bond scheme, where a renter can digitally port their bond on the current property that they're renting to a new property they're in. That's going to save people up to $4,000 every time they rent. We're at the final stages, and we hope to launch our smarter rental bond scheme and in the middle of this year. So these are significant wins. It's changed the paradigm, and I think it's given greater confidence for those who've chosen renting, for whatever circumstance they find themselves in, to be able to give that really sense that the New South Wales government is on their side, and to ensure that they can live with certainty and also find significant cost-saving measures in this space.
Yes, no, I love the idea of the rental bond scheme changes. You touched on that long-term renting is becoming the norm for many Australians. And I guess a big part of that is ensuring that the quality of accommodation that they are renting is maintained, and that landlords are actually doing their bit in this area. Where we can't have a situation where we've got a long-term rental market where people are living in substandard accommodation because properties, due to landlord or strata neglect, are just not adequately maintained. So, Minister, are there reforms that you are looking to introduce to ensure that tenants have safe, compliant and defect-free homes?
Well, look, one, there's the laws are in place to make sure that if you're renting a property, it has to be habitable. But of course, that's a very broad definition. And we are looking at this space because every renter that has the right to live in a quality home, a safe and secure quality home as well. So that's actually really important. And recently we've just passed legislation, particularly around for DV victims, for example, who live in rental homes, and giving them greater protection as well. But certainly in the quality of standard, we are looking at this reform and making sure that people who do rent are able to and deserve to live in a quality. So I suppose watch this space is what I'm saying. So yeah, because the rental reform is an ongoing reform. It's been a difficult set of reforms, but the New South Wales government is not going to stop. We need to support the 2.3 million renters and growing in New South Wales as well, to ensure that they can have confidence in the rental market.
Yeah, I think it's like particularly important when we're talking about long-term rentals, because often a landlord sort of doesn't get motivated to do something to upgrade their property until a tenant moves out. And so being able to ensure and give those renters of long-term, who are in a whether it's a house or an apartment, for a long term, that sort of comfort that landlord is constantly maintaining that property, that'll be a good initiative to get on top of. How is the government best placed to support the delivery, do you think, of build to rent and community housing to relieve pressure on the private rental market? I know that some of Minister Scully's reforms in the planning portfolio, where we've got incentives to build affordable housing, and that affordable housing is then handed over to a community housing provider to manage. Are there other things that are falling across your portfolio that are sort of, I guess, boosting the build to rent and community housing provision?
Yeah, look, certainly Ministers Jackson and Scully and I, we work very closely. We've got totally interdependent ministries, as I mentioned. Minister Scully determines where you can build, what you can build. I make sure that it's done to high quality standard and also how people live. And then, of course, there are more vulnerable groups that Minister Jackson looks after. And we've done a lot in this space. The government is investing, I think, over $5 billion over the forwards into social and affordable housing, a really significant and some of the take-ups that we've done, we've led by example. And as I mentioned, around prefab homes, we can lead by example. Also, the quality of the homes, making sure that we continue to set the example for industry to actually follow. So certainly in the build to rent space, I think this space has been underinvested, underexplored. So we're looking at ways to encourage, to provide incentives for industry to actually invest in this space, because having institutional money enter the rental market, I think is commercially sensible, but also adds to the housing stock for the people of New South Wales.
Yeah, I think in the build to rent space, I think it's a great new asset. As much as I'm not new anymore, but I'll call it an asset class that has come to the table. It'd be nice to see, I think, a bit more product in that area being affordable. A lot of the first sort of, I guess, cabs off the rank in the space have been almost when you look at them, very high quality housing, which there is a market for as well. But it'd be good to see, some more affordability in the build to rent space.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, for example, Minister Park and Minister Jackson has provided also what we call frontline housing as well, because given housing is so expensive, we've got stories of a nurse or a police officer or a teacher, essential workers living miles and miles, commuting 3 to 4 hours a day. That can't be the case. So we're looking at those particular frontline essential workers as well, and part of affordable and accessible housing.
Beyond increasing supply, what other policy levers exist within your portfolio that could stabilise rental markets while balancing confidence for investors and developers?
Yeah, look, as I mentioned, rental affordability, accessibility is founded by rental availability. Like we can't address the price and the commercial realities without getting more quality homes into the system. So I said, the building space, and also with Minister Scully, let's get high quality buildings with new technology onto the market. Now, in the meantime, we have to focus on how people live. And that's why our rental reforms that we've done, as difficult as they might have been, are so important. They are foundational and they are really fundamental and forward looking as well when we're catering for a more bigger group, a cohort of people in New South Wales who are going to be renting. So as I mentioned, our smarter rental bond scheme, saving people up to $4,000. I said some of the saving measures about limiting rental increases, fee-free ways to pay, not having to pay for your background checks. All these things add up to a cost of living pressure, easing that cost of living pressure for renters who, in all fairness, are doing it pretty tough at the moment.
It is tough, very tough. Well, let's move on to strata reform, which is very big part of your portfolio. It falls under your title as Minister for Better Regulation and Fair Trading. I guess, many purchasers of new apartments find themselves under mortgage stress. And I think there's always a tendency when a new body corporate forms and owners come together to say, let's not worry about starting a sinking fund yet. Maybe we'll slightly underinsure the apartment building. What can we do to keep our levies down, which can be dangerous territory to enter into? And with, as you said, with over, well over half of Sydney residents now living in strata titled housing, it's an area of discussion that doesn't often get a lot of airtime. I often think about it. I guess when I first bought my first apartment, and I remember sitting down at the table with the new owners, and it was very much that discussion. Do we have to have a sinking fund? Let's just keep it really, really low. The building's all sort of new. So I guess, Minister, what are the biggest challenges that you see related to strata schemes, and what are your top priorities for strata reform?
Yep. Well, look, I said fundamentally, more and more people are going to be living in strata. There are over 88,000 schemes. And a bit of history trivia. Strata was actually started here in New South Wales back in the 70s. We were one of the first jurisdiction in the world to actually create, common property and common title. So I think it started with a building down in Burwood, funny enough. So yeah, from that, of course, we've been world leaders in strata. Now, the reforms that we've done in strata have also not been easy. But the government is focused on making the right decisions and the hard decisions, because it's what the people of New South Wales deserve in the future. And as we look at our transit-oriented development, it's all going to be dense living around major infrastructure. So we have to cater for the way people are going to live in the future. The government has passed 4 tranches of strata reformery. We've got one in the books at the moment, and on top of that, of course, we've just released the Productivity and Equality Commissions report into strata commissions. Now, the challenge in strata has always been one of skew and balance of information between a strata managing agent and an owners corporation residents. They have 2 very different levels of knowledge. Strata managers are professionals. They're paid to look after the owners and residents. Owners are volunteers. Some obviously are looking after multi-million-dollar assets, but they don't necessarily have the skills. And what the government's done is based on a few fundamentals: transparency, accountability, making sure that owners, residents and owners corporations have the full available real-time information so they can make the best decisions on the behalf of their fellow residents. Things like making sure a disclosure of conflicts of interest, making sure that strata managers must obtain multiple quotes if the fix is greater than $30,000. So we have greater powers to strike off strata managers who are caught doing the wrong thing significantly, but also providing ways to train owners, residents about their obligations. So as you mentioned earlier, underinvestment in a strata building doesn't make the problems go away, they actually make it worse. So we need to have clear plans on what level of investment is required, and also encouraging owners corporations to invest what is their property and their asset. So things about greater disclosure, like, for example, for a buyer, the information those to provide to a prospective buyers, they could be looking at, well, how much has the owners corporation invested in the building? And so, for example, if initially a strata investment or investment in the building was, say, had $100 a year, if the owners corporation has only invested, say, $75 a year, well, the next prospective buyer should be actually have access to that information. What that does is actually encourage the owners corporation to invest in it, because when they go to sell it, they can say, look, we've actually invested in this asset that we own, so that you can have greater confidence. So those things actually really matter, and also providing ways to provide support and training and knowledge to the owners corporations about their legal obligations as well. So I think it's twofold. Strata managers need to do better, greater transparency and accountability, but also owners corporation residents need to understand that this is a valuable asset that they own. Investing it is in their interest to ensure that they can maximize the value of that asset for the next prospective buyer if they choose to actually sell it. And I said, underinvesting doesn't make the problem go away, it actually makes it worse.
No, absolutely. If you're the owner in a multi-unit development, strata living can sometimes be fraught with disputes over repairs and renovations. I know this from personal experience. I'm in one at my in a dispute at the moment over a renovation. There can be disputes over controls put on short-term letting, particularly sort of with things like Airbnb, and governance. There's lots of governance matters as well. Are there strata reforms in play that will improve fairness and clarity, I guess, in these types of areas within strata laws?
Yeah, certainly. Like I said, strata committees are made of volunteers. Some might have knowledge, some might don't. And like in all arrangements, when you've got lots of ideas and lots of personalities, you're bound to come into differences of opinion. Some can be resolved easily, some can't. So that's why actually arming strata community members with knowledge about their obligation, about their legal obligations, and dispute resolution, fair trading now under the reforms can obviously step in and play a greater role into resolving dispute, and actually do what we call forced undertakings, and actually taking strong decisions to resolve dispute on the behalf of owners corporations. So in that sense, these reforms are really important, but I do think that improving the knowledge and the skill of owners, residents in strata communities is actually part of the solution as well. And also making sure that strata managers are actually doing their role to look after the owners corporations and the strata communities, because that's actually what they're paid to do. So those reforms that the government has done and the government will continue to do will be really part of actually improving making sure that strata communities are run more efficiently, and also where the disputes occur, then they're resolved as quickly as possible. And if we need to, fair trading, the government can come in, because it's in the best of everybody to have these long-running disputes resolved quickly.
Is there any sort of registration system for strata managers, like like the iCert system, or are you looking at introducing anything like that?
Yeah, well, we have our name and shame list.
Oh, okay. I didn't realise that.
Yeah, we have a name and shame list. So consumers, go onto our name and shame register at the New South Wales government website, and you can see the enforcement action that fair trading has taken against strata managers who've, obviously played around with other people's money, who have not met their legal obligations. And so that level of information, that level of transparency, will give consumer more confidence, but also send a very clear message to strata managers. Inappropriate behaviour, illegal conduct will not be tolerated. You'll be identified, you'll be prosecuted, you'll be fined, and you'll be banned from operating in this industry.
That's good to know. I'll go and have a look on that.
Yeah, and I encourage everybody to have a look at it.
You've introduced the Strata Hub platform, Minister. Can you share with us, I guess, how that works and how that is bringing accountability to strata management?
Well, this is the same thing about if you provide real good time information to stakeholders, to individuals, to consumers, it actually leads to better decision. So having the Strata Hub information in the one place means that those who are going to be living in Strata, looking to buy in Strata, they can actually get one single source of information. So I think the power of information, real-time information, I think is fundamental to better decision making, improves transparency, I think improves accountability, and gives that power of information to the consumer to make the best decisions for themselves in whatever circumstances they might find themselves in. So really good platform, technology, innovation, providing the power to consumers.
And is that mandatory for all, I guess, stratas to report their information onto the Strata Hub platform?
As I understand, look, it's a very important service. There are lots of information in the Strata Hub. I can't call specifically what part of Strata information is required in there, but certainly there'll be fundamental information about a strata that needs to be imported in the Strata Hub. But we're always looking at ways to actually improve whether Strata Hub, whether it's a name and shame, is what other information can we provide to consumers and to the market, because it's in everybody's interest to continue the trust and confidence in Strata.
Absolutely. Well, slowly getting to the end of the podcast, but just two last questions. In many ways, I guess the housing crisis, as we've talked about, is a confidence crisis that cuts across both, Minister Scully's portfolio and your own. How are you, or how can you best work together? You've touched on some of this to improve consumer confidence in our housing sector. Are there new initiatives that you've got in your head that haven't yet sort of hit the table, or?
Well, the government is the whole of government, not just myself and Minister Scully and Minister Jackson, but also things around transport, things around Minister Rose and Minister Rose Jackson's duty around water, how we build urban communities, all these things that matter, recreation and arts and culture. So it's not just Minister Scully and I's portfolio, it's the whole of government portfolio. And, building communities is important because we need to think about how people actually live and want to live as well. So we're always looking at new ideas. We've got a huge reform agenda. We've made some really difficult decisions in each of our portfolios, really making sure that the reforms that Minister Scully has done, like once in a generation planning reforms, taking away the red tape, reducing the costs, instilling the confidence, making sure our compliance works, the power of information, technology. There's not one part of government that's not actually focused on actually housing, because the impact of not addressing the issue are actually quite profound. We've lost, 40 to 50,000 people from New South Wales to other states. And the people who are losing are actually young people in the 25 to 45 age bracket who are in the prime working lives. That's correct. The ones that are, going to start families, the ones who are going to continue to provide employment, who are going to start business, who are our essential workers, who are our teachers, our childcare workers. So the impact on the economy, the impact on families, like we don't want to be a city or a state where of no grandkids. Breaking up that social fabric where people can't instill themselves in the local community has significant social repercussions. So that's why housing is so important. That's why the government has made some really big and difficult reforms, but they're not the easy decision, but they're the right decisions for the people of New South Wales to set us up for the future.
And lastly, just looking ahead 5 years, what does success look like for you in restoring trust and confidence in New South Wales building and housing system?
Yeah, look, more quality housing, fewer defects, increasing the standard of professionalisation, and more people staying in New South Wales. I said at the core of a lot of our problems in New South Wales, economic and social, is actually housing. You know, Australians, the concept of owning your own home is such a strong cultural Australian trait. You know, it's a great Australian dream, and at the moment, part of it's actually being shattered for so many Australians, particularly younger Australians. You know, this is such a strong social issue that all governments at all levels must be united, and industry as well. We're actually all in this ship together, and we must continue to work together. So success for me is obviously a strong community, a strong economy with housing and more quality housing into the market. And that can be measured by, of course, like defects, more approvals, more building, innovation, the uptake of innovation, and continually making sure that we deliver and we continue to support the housing agenda for the people of New South Wales. And I'm optimistic. I'm excited, and I know the government's made some really big decisions, hard decisions, but which we know are important for the people of New South Wales, and it's what they actually deserve.
Thank you, Minister, so much for taking the time to join us today on the podcast. It's been great to hear about the reform package. I love your passion and your energy. Like that's incredible. So thank you, and I know we're in good hands.
Yeah, thank you very much, Belinda, and thank you very much for having me on your show.
If you have any questions or thoughts to share, click the link in our show notes. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're a developer working on a project and you need community engagement, or you'd like your project to have an online presence on the UrbanTalk platform, then please get in touch, and you can visit us at urbantalk.com.au. Don't forget to follow the podcast, and we love it if you'd leave a review. It helps people to find us. And let's just keep the conversations going. And if you've got an idea for the podcast, please reach out again to the UrbanTalk website. I'm your host, Belinda Barnett, and thank you for joining us on the UrbanTalk podcast.
Consulting with the community about your proposed development or planning project can be daunting and challenging, especially when media and local action groups drive public perception. But now there's a cost-effective way to avoid misrepresentation and ease public tension and resistance towards your project. Introducing UrbanTalk. UrbanTalk is Australia's first property development and community engagement platform. Establish a digital presence for your project that raises community awareness, answers questions, and promotes greater understanding of urban planning and development. Intuitive templates, developed using 30 years of community consultation experience, allow you to easily create a comprehensive listing for your project. Populating fields with information already at hand, your project listing becomes the community information hub, a source of truth that provides straightforward explanations, images, videos, and centralises all inquiries. Your listing is supported by site signage, notification postcards, and newsletters that direct people to the page, with the ability to track public interest in the project. Now you can provide a reliable source of information in English and 10 other languages, creating an avenue for inquiry to gain community trust and improve the path to project approval. Create your project listing today.